Are these going to be, they won't be in the way, will they?
No. Today is Thursday, October 31st, 2013, and this is the start of an interview with Alfreda White at her home on Cunningham Street. I'm Nancy Clark, interviewer for the Oral History Project. Alfreda came to Hopkinton in 1950 at the age of 25 years old with her husband Fred. So she's lived in town for 63 years. So let's start, Alfreda, with your telling us what brought you and Fred to Hopkinton in 1950.
Well, Fred was in the building business then, and the Cape was a tourist area, and there was no work for carpenters in the winter. So he came up here to work with his father.
All right, so you had a connection here. His father was here, and what was his father doing?
Well, he was retired, you know. He died in his 90s, but it was the work.
Okay.
And then Fred worked for a company in Westboro, Dodd and Tyler, building homes. They bought an apple orchard, and when that was completed, that's when Fred went to Keefe Tech.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he became a teacher.
Yeah, and I didn't work. I stayed home with my children. We had 4 children,
Yeah.
and I stayed here until my youngest Diane was in the 2nd grade, and then Sheila was getting ready to go to college, so I got a job at General Electric where I worked for 18 years
Okay, great.
until they left the state, and then I went and worked for Prime Computer.
Okay, all right, wonderful, wonderful. And what can you tell us about Cunningham Street back in the 1950s and 60s? What was it like?
There were no homes on it at all. No,
Just yours?
no, because I forget the name of the people that owned the property there, but it was all farmland, and it was sold. It was Joe Pine bought the land, and then they developed the whole thing.
Okay, all right, and
Yeah,
you
and
must be
then,
talking about Victory Lane.
Fred's
and-
father was a carpenter too, and in 1954 his wife died, Elsie Cunningham, and he was left this section of land on this side of the street. So Fred and Pa, everybody called him Pa, they built 9 homes on White Street and on Cunningham.
Okay.
And that's where Fred worked until 1970, when the superintendent at Keefe Tech told Fred he should go back to school, he should be a teacher.
Okay.
So he did. There were 4 or 5 of them that went to Fitchburg State to get their degree, and he worked down there as long as I worked here, both of us, 18 years.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, and I didn't know that Cunningham Street was named after the Cunningham
After
Farm,
Cunninghams,
and obviously
yeah.
White Street is
They'd
named
been there,
after.
the Cunninghams had been there into the early 1800s, I think. I never met them. They died before I met them.
And when you came here in the 50s, what kind of a farm was it? Do you remember what they were growing or raising?
Well, what Mr. Cunningham did was he had greenhouses and raised flowers, which he took into Boston to sell,
Okay.
and he owned several acres of land around here, and but he had died, and Elsie had one sister, and she couldn't. She had a man a Finnish guy from Finland. And he was a caretaker. He worked around the farm. They had greenhouses. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
she couldn't do it. And then she died in '54, and that's when Fred and his father started
Building the houses.
For a while.
Yeah, and that must have kept them busy for a
Yeah.
few years.
Yeah.
So, but Hopkinton didn't have a lot of building back then, correct?
No.
Did you feel like you lived out in the middle of nowhere? Or where did you go to shop? And
Westboro mostly.
okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
I didn't drive then either.
Oh.
I got my license after the children were all in school. I just stayed home with all of them because that's when I learned to knit, which I do to this day. And but I stayed home, and then I went to work down at GE for quite a few years.
And while you were home and your children were going to school, what can you recall anything about those school years of theirs? What schools were in Hopkinton? What schools did they go
The
to?
schools were good. They've always been good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did they start
get a
out?
good education.
Yeah.
Yes.
I assume they started out.
That's what brought a lot of people to town was the schools. They checked the schools first, right?
Right. Right.
Well, we were always into education. My mother was a graduate of BU, as was her sister and her two brothers. They lived in Dorchester.
Yeah.
So we always, and very religious, Methodist churches in here, you wouldn't believe, ministers and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Book of Family History.
so we kept busy anyway. It was a busy life because as I said, I went to work to make more money because Sheila was starting college, even though she got a scholarship. But it didn't cost as much then as it does now, right?
Right.
And so our four children graduated to college. And then the two girls got married, so then there were weddings, babies.
Right.
No?
Right.
Yeah.
And
But we were busy.
yeah. And do you remember, back, as I said, when you came here in the 50s and in the 50s and 60s?
There was nothing on the street.
Nothing at all.
No houses. Only
So-
the one down there in our house.
All right. I know there's one at the very corner, that stone house on the corner
Yeah,
of
that's the Cunningham farm.
All right,
Yeah.
that was the Cunningham
Yeah,
Farmhouse, right in the corner of
But
Cunningham
it's
and
been
Wood.
brought up now and completely remodeled, and it's beautiful inside.
Nice, yeah. And when you would go out that way, and then, so if you turned right on Wood Street, you'd go to Westboro, and you said you did some shopping there. How often did you go into Hopkinton, and what was downtown Hopkinton like? Do you have any recollection of that?
Well, I didn't drive then,
That's right.
I didn't get my license. In fact, I went to a driver training school and got my license. I didn't tell Fred. After I'd had 2 lessons, I told him. Because they came over and picked me out and took me out,
Mm-hmm.
I never got my license in high school because we lived far away from school, and I have to walk home, and I didn't want to walk. So, and my sister had a car and drove, and we worked together. We worked at a bank at that time before I was married. So anyway, that was it. Yeah.
So if you didn't drive, did Fred do the shopping?
He took me.
He took you?
He stayed with the kids in the car.
Yeah. And do you remember what grocery store you went to? Where the grocery store was?
First National, I think, was in Westboro then.
Okay.
Now you're really going back.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of people that probably never heard of First National, but I have. Yeah.
Busy times. It was busy.
Yeah.
But we were so busy. It was fun though watching the kids grow up because our 4 kids graduated college and
Yeah. And what kind of activities I assume they went to center school and then was Elmwood?
I worked on the school lunch program at Center School.
Oh, okay.
Just
Did
for a
you
couple of
little
years though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they must have gone to, was it the junior senior high school? That's
What?
now the middle school. Did they go to the new school, I assume, the junior senior high that was built in the 1950s?
They graduated before the new school was built,
Yeah,
the new high school.
Right, I don't mean that new high school. I know there was a new one in the 1950s, which right now is the middle school. So
Yeah, that
would
was
have
high
gone
school.
to
They
that
went there,
one, yeah.
yes.
And were there activities there that they were involved in after school?
Not
Sports?
too much, no, because of transportation.
All right. So it was difficult
Except
because
when
this
I
is
got
far.
my license. I
Yeah.
would stop my car at the school and fill my car up with kids and come home.
Yeah.
Mine and others.
Yeah, but I that makes a lot of sense. I assume that people that lived in town, maybe their children were able to do more after school because they were close and could walk.
Yeah.
You're a good probably 4 miles from town
Yeah.
out here on Cunningham Street, so that makes a lot of sense, yeah. Do you remember anything about some of the other couples that you and Fred were friendly with, and what type of things people did in
Couples Club.
Hopkinton?
Did you belong to
So
that?
no, tell me about the couples
That was the
club.
Congregational Church, but it was all churches. Anybody could go to it. There were no people in town that went there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was a way that you could meet people and
They
socialize.
met once a month or something like that. Yeah.
And did the couples club have a special activity, or did they always do the same thing? Did they meet for a potluck dinner, or was it a
Oh,
dance, or did they play cards? Or
we put on a stage show once, I remember that.
oh, that's terrific.
But that was a long time ago.
And can you recall any of the other people that were in the couples club when you were?
Oh, yes, the Dickermans, remember
Oh, yeah.
them? They were
I remember Fred.
pretty good in the church there.
Yeah.
But I grew up Methodist. I was a Methodist, my
Uh-huh.
family. In fact, they're in here, they're Methodist ministers.
Right.
And very religious, the whole family was.
Yeah. But it sounds like, so Hopkinton had the Congregational Church, and it had St. John's Catholic Church, St. Paul's.
Well, there are about 6 or 7 churches in town.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is a Methodist church too. It was at the Episcopal Church at one time.
Yeah, now I
But
think they
it's
do have
moved, isn't it?
services. I don't know.
There's
I
no
don't know,
sign
but-
up.
All right, but I do
Yeah.
recall at what you're talking about.
Maybe it's
yeah.
down by where the Price Chopper is, that church down there. Is it a Lutheran church
Maybe.
across the street?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. Community
I
Covenant
really
is the
don't know.
name, but yeah. But it sounds like back in the 50s and 60s, the churches.
I went to
all-
the Baptist church down here.
Oh, in Woodville.
Yeah,
Well,
we
that
went
makes
there
sense 'cause it was
first.
nice and convenient. It sounds like a lot of.
See, I didn't drive, so Fred took us
Right,
down there.
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of the social activities, though, were maybe sponsored by the churches, whether you went
That's
to that
right.
church or not.
Well, that's where it was when I grew up at home. We went
Uh-huh.
out, we all went to church.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
church was very active.
yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about any community traditions or celebrations, special days in Hopkinton that every year you looked forward to?
Well, it was Poly Arts and
All right, so
the 4th of July parades.
yeah,
And,
could you tell us a little bit more about what you remember about Polyarts of old?
No, not too much. We always used to go up, but we
Uh-huh.
just met a lot of people we knew there.
All right. So again, that was a way to socialize, not just to go and possibly buy some
Yeah,
crafts or get some
yeah,
ideas.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? Let me see.
And what about the 4th of July parade? I know a little bit about it, but I'm sure many people
we
don't.
were, what do they have? What do they call the ones that are the leaders of the parade?
The Grand Marshal?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we were grand marshals of some parade.
Oh, really? You and Fred?
I forget
Mhm.
which one.
Yeah.
Rode in a car.
Okay.
It might have been a 4th of July one.
And
that
is the-
was quite a while ago.
And is the 4th of July parade the Horribles parade? Is that the one
Yeah.
where they have floats and?
Yeah, that could be the one.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And how about marathons? When you first came
Fred,
here, was it a big
Fred
day?
was, every year they'd have servicemen represented at the head of the line, and Fred was one of them one year, so I went, and that's when we took David, my grandson, with me. He was only about 12, I guess.
Uh-huh.
That's a long time ago, because
Yeah.
he's graduating from college this year.
Wow.
My
Yeah.
last grandson.
So they would honor servicemen sometimes
Yeah,
before
they
the
do it
start
every
of the
year, they still do.
marathon.
They do
Yeah.
it every year. Not only men, but women too, I
Mhm.
guess. Yeah.
That's great.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember any of the other servicemen in town that might have been honored that were of your generation?
No, really. If you watch Channel 8, you know, if they
Right.
replay it, then you know
Some of them, yeah.
who the servicemen are. I guess there are a lot of them, though.
I remember the
They go to the
Phippses.
senior center. That's where I spent a lot of time at the senior center,
Right
which
now.
Fred was on the committee to build.
Yeah.
And, but they have a dinner, a lunch for them once a month at the
Mhm.
senior center.
Yeah, the veterans.
Yeah,
That's
they
nice.
remember them.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
Well, we can maybe move on to sort of how active you and Fred were in the town of Hopkinton. I do know some of the things you did, and you said that Fred was on the building committee to build the present senior center.
Right. He was on the building committee for the housing for the elderly, too.
All right. it
Just
is-
briefly, because at that point, that's when he was switching jobs and going to work at Keefe Tech.
Mhm.
So he didn't stay there too long.
Yeah. So were a lot of people volunteering for the town that way? Did you know a lot of, friends and neighbors who were on committees like Fred? Is that, I guess what I'm getting at, is that something that's really significant in Hopkinton, sort of the small town, and
Yeah.
people chipped in and helped out.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that volunteer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what else do you remember what else Fred volunteered on back in those days? I think when I moved here, he was on the school committee.
That I volunteered, I don't really get
Mhm.
too involved now with anything, you know. I just go to the senior center and
Yeah.
we do, that's a lot of charity work. We
Yeah.
make,
Well, which is
we
wonderful.
make
That's
blankets, and
yeah.
I make mittens and other little items, and they sell the mittens in the thrift shop.
Right. Well, that's definitely getting
And
involved.
these blankets we make, all the girls make squares, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then, well, someone, or I put a lot of them together, and then I take them in, and one of the other women uses the blanket stitch and sews the strips together, and then puts a fancy crocheted edge around the edge of it.
Yeah.
And then they go to Just Because, or to the church, or the hospitals, and
And that's
there's
wonderful.
always somebody that's wanting.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've been doing that for a long time when you were a homemaker in the
I
1950s and
started
60s.
that when I retired, and we both retired from work in 1988.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had a little bit more time
Yeah.
to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that your life before that was very busy in Hopkinton with your children's activities.
Oh, yeah,
and-
that took up all our
and
time.
whatnot. Yeah, yeah. So what did the kids do back then? I mean, I know nowadays sometimes kids talk about Hopkinton's so far from movie theaters and things like that, and there's nothing to do here. And,
What did
well,
our
what did
kids
your
do?
children
What
say?
did
What did
they
they do?
Well, they, see, I didn't drive, so they
Right.
couldn't get too involved in school, because nobody would bring them home.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about
But
you
in
said
sports,
there wasn't a lot of a neighborhood here, but I'm sure there were some houses down on Wood
Well,
Street
there
or
were lots
whatever
of
where.
children around here then.
Okay.
Yeah, there were,
So they just played with sort of the neighborhood kids.
yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Was it difficult to get them to come home for dinner or to get them to come home for dark?
Hey, it's trick or treat night tonight, so we better
It
not
is.
stay too long. Gets
It
dark,
is.
they'll be here, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you've lived here a long time. What kind of changes have you seen? Do you have any idea how many people lived in
It's like
Hopkinton
Route
when you
9
came?
out here, this road. You
Okay. All
wouldn't believe the traffic, morning and night.
right. And when you first moved here?
No, there was, as I say, 2 houses on the street.
Yeah.
When Fred built this one, then his father built the one next door, and then they built all the ones, well, all except 3 on White Street.
Right.
And some on the street too. 9 altogether, yeah. And after that, that's when he went to teaching.
So you went to teaching.
He worked for a while in Westboro till 1970, around there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
And
he went to Keith Tech.
right. Right. And I started to ask you before about school committee. Do you remember how he happened to get involved in school committee? Run for
He
election?
just
in Hopkinton?
volunteered.
Yeah.
He volunteered for everything.
Yeah. Well,
He
that's
just like, he just did that, that's all. He liked it.
And in Hopkinton, there's a lot of opportunity to do that.
Yes,
So, yeah,
yeah, right. We got a good school system.
yeah, yeah. Do you remember anything else about town government in the past? Any, who the old police chiefs were, or what the police department was like? Small, I assume, but
I really don't know
yeah.
too much about that, but they took care of everybody. It was good.
They
did a
took
good
care of
job.
everybody,
They
yeah.
did a good job.
I bet they
Yeah.
really knew people.
I mean, you gotta give them credit, they're volunteering, well, not all of them, but most of them, and that's something.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Pines before. Joe Pine's father was fire chief, correct?
He was what?
Fire chief at
Was
some
he?
point. Yeah,
Oh, I
believe
don't remember
so.
that.
Yeah, I believe he was. It's just a lot of the names, people that you've mentioned were very
Yeah.
involved in the
Yeah,
town in one
right.
way or the other. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So anything else you can think
Well,
about?
something else about my family,
Yeah.
my mother's family. They, as I said, they came from New York, and they were Dutch, English,
Mm-hmm.
and the Ryersons. And one of them, this Mr. Ryerson here, he owned part of New York. He was a wealthy man.
Wow.
Ryerson, yeah. But anyway,
That's wonderful.
here was the book on it here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you have
Yeah.
some great family history that somebody
This is,
saved.
this is
yeah.
all about the Nickersons and the Wardles. And there's
That's
the Nickerson Club too, that they have down
Still
the Cape.
today,
We belong
uh-huh.
to that,
Yeah, oh, that's
because there's
good.
so many Nickersons on the Cape.
So, and you mentioned how you had been raised on the Cape yourself. Your family went from Hopkinton to the Cape in the summer?
Oh, always, yeah. Down for a week with my parents.
Yeah. So that
Uh-huh.
certainly was a busy
Until my
time.
father died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure the kids liked that. So that was part of their summers here.
Yes.
Was sort of
right.
getting
Well, we
in.
still go back. We still do.
Yeah.
Just a couple of years ago, after Fred died, my daughter Sheila, her son and his family, wife and 2 children, and Sheila's, that was a son, and then the daughter and husband and their little boy, they all drove up from, or flew up from South Carolina and Fredericksburg, Virginia, where they live.
Mm-hmm.
And we all went to the Cape for a week
Mm-hmm.
down there. Yeah,
Yeah.
spent a week down there. Visited. All I have left down there now are nieces and nephews, so we visited some of them too.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we had a real good time and ate a lot of fresh fish.
Oh, I bet.
I love
I know right now a lot of people who live in Hopkinton go to the Cape in the summer. Do you remember back in the
It's so
50s
crowded though.
Yeah, in the 50s and 60s, did you have other friends in Hopkinton who went to the Cape? Or was it mostly people like you
no,
that
it
had
was
roots
just-
there?
It was just us. We went down to visit our family.
Yeah, so it
Till my
was
father passed away.
yeah, there
Yeah.
weren't as many people just vacationing down there like there
Yeah.
are today from
Uh-huh.
town, I guess. Yeah.
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 Uh-huh.
Anything else you can think of about old time Hopkinton? Like I said, maybe downtown. Some of the shops that were there, or Brown and Smith, those types
Yeah.
of places.
Rose's Beauty Parlor.
Tell me
where I
about
used to
Rose's
take
Beauty
my
Parlor.
girls to have their hair cut.
And it was on Main Street.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
Rose Fecto.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That'd be Ernie Fecto's
Ernie's
wife?
sister.
Sister. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh.
And that obviously is no longer there. There is a beauty parlor down there, but it's not
Yeah.
Rose's. Yeah. Do you remember any of the other shops that might have been there, or stores, or?
Just Colella's has been there forever.
Yeah, 1940s.
And, I don't know what else. As I say, I mostly go to Westboro. I always
Yeah,
went to
because you're
Westboro.
close. Yeah.
Because everything, my doctor was there, and where I got my prescriptions, and
Yeah.
the
And there-
beauty parlor, and the stores, they were all right in one section. Always go.
And it was really closer to
Yeah.
you here than downtown
Yes.
Hopkinton
Yeah.
was. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And then Fred had a lot of friends in Westboro, because he worked there for at least 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else about the schools when your own children? You said you had how many children? I forget.
I had 4 children.
4 children, and they went through the Hopkinton
I have, let's
schools.
see, we had 4 children. We have 4 grandchildren, and 2 of them are married. So now we have 4 great-grandchildren.
Nice. And when you were, what was it like raising children in Hopkinton, in a small town like this? What would you say were the benefits of it, or were there negatives of it?
I can't say it wasn't that crowded. It's a lot safer than it is now anyway, right?
So, yeah, so you thought it was safer? Did you let them, did they go far? Like, did
No,
they take off on their bikes?
They
Or?
stayed right around here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they never got in any trouble. Of course, I was always here.
Yeah, and that was very common of the time period, right? I would
Yeah.
assume most of your friends that were homemakers as well back
Yes.
then.
Yes,
Mhm.
until well, they didn't have that many places where you could leave a child during the day, you know. Some of the women, they had the child care right in their own homes,
Yeah.
you know.
But that was about it. There were really no daycare
Yeah.
centers. Or,
Uh-huh.
like that, so that would prohibit a lot of people,
But it's so
women from working.
expensive now.
Mm-hmm, yeah, it is.
Everything is.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't like what's going on. It's scary.
yeah. So are there any things today, as you look at Hopkinton today, and you say, you know, it really hasn't changed much from when I first came here, and then maybe we'll talk about the things you think has changed, but is there anything about Hopkinton that you think is pretty much the same
Don't go
or
out.
similar?
Don't be uptown at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because you just wait in a line of traffic.
All right,
The
which you
traffic.
never did before.
Traffic is,
Right,
every town's like that.
Yeah.
It's bad. It backs right up to 495, or it's backed right up to Colella's.
yeah.
It's just a standstill. They need a bypass road in this town.
And some say that 495 was the beginning of all the traffic when 495 was built through Hopkinton. It
Yeah.
sort of made people who lived here able to commute more.
How long have you been retired?
I've just been retired for a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of the changes that you have, yeah. Anything else you've seen as far as changes in Hopkinton, and what do you think about it?
Not really. It's busy, busier than I've ever known it.
Yeah. So when you came here, it was more like a sleepy, rural town.
Yes, yeah. I like it here, though. I like Hopkinton.
Yeah. And what is it that you like about Hopkinton the most? I'm sure everybody I've talked to loves Hopkinton. What is it about Hopkinton that you like so much?
Well, when my son was here, he loved that the air was so nice and clean. He lives
Yeah.
in Hawaii, and they get this volcanic ash
Mhm.
from one of the other islands, from the volcano,
Yeah.
and so the air is bad. But he's going to retire soon too, I think. And then
Yeah.
Cheryl, she comes up every year, at Christmas time for a week, spends a week with me, and my sister and her daughter come out from Andover, so we have a talking and have lunch here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything else about Hopkinton that you like in particular?
I like it. It's quiet here.
Mm-hmm.
It's quiet out here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still, to a certain extent, it is
Yeah.
quiet out here, isn't
Uh-huh.
it? Yeah. Yeah.
But I go out, I keep involved, like Tuesday Sheila comes over here and has lunch with me, or we go out to lunch. That's my oldest daughter.
Mhm.
She's the one that did all this
Yeah,
stuff.
the genealogy.
And let me see, Wednesday I play cards, and Thursday I go to the senior center for knitting.
Yeah.
And then after that, we have lunch down there. That was today, yeah.
So I assume that back when you first came here in the 50s and 60s, did you and Fred play cards? Was that something that
I
a lot of the
played
couples
bridge.
did?
I played bridge with one of the oldest bridge groups in town,
Oh,
Evelyn Stratton, and
okay.
I guess most of those women have died now.
I do remember.
But that's how I got into the club, when somebody died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't play bridge now.
And were there other women that you would knit with back then, or did most of the homemakers
Not
just sort of
then.
knit in their own
I
homes?
knitted at home here, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. How about sewing? Was that something that a lot of people did back
my
then?
girls do a lot of sewing. Well, they did. They had their own sewing machines, but I never got into sewing, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about the high school curriculum when your children would have been going through? Were they introduced to some of those domestic arts like sewing and?
Well, they took home economics.
All right.
They had that class.
Yeah. Do you remember
Yeah.
what they would have done in home economics? Because I'm
Uh-huh.
sure that students today wouldn't have any
Sports, a lot of
idea.
sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they did take part in the sports. But as I said, I didn't drive, so they didn't have a ride home, so it
Yeah.
sort of limited them to
Yeah.
what they could
And
get
it,
into.
you
know.
mentioned home economics. Would that have just been the girls that took home economics?
Yeah.
And so they learned some sewing and maybe some
Mhm.
cooking.
Yeah, sewing. They had their own sewing machines.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, and that's where they would have learned it, I assume, or some of it. Or were you able to teach them some of those skills also?
No, they picked that up just in going to school with
in
that
Home
house,
Ec.
so, yeah. Sheila made my drapes in there.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You know.
And so that would have been part of the high school curriculum. And while the girls were taking home economics, what would the boys have been taking?
Well, Ricky got into, what do you call it, tumbling, those exercises, you know, they weren't exercises, but he was pretty good at that.
Yeah, like gymnastics.
He gave it up, he afraid he'd break some bones or something.
Okay,
you know.
yeah. I was just wondering if the boys would have had any kind of a, I know my husband used to talk about shop, where they learned some automotive
They
skills and
had it,
some
but I don't remember
woodworking
too much.
and,
I don't think Ricky got into, I only have one boy.
all right, you don't
I
remember him
don't.
bringing home
No,
things that
I
he made
don't.
out of wood and
No.
metal or anything like
No,
that, yeah.
no.
Yeah, I was just curious if Hopkinton, you know, now it seems to be so focused on college curriculum, or college prep curriculum,
Yeah.
and I wondered if back then it had any other commercial courses besides, you know, for the kids that were going to
Well, there were
college.
quite a few students that went on to college though,
Yeah.
each year.
Yeah, yeah,
They were prepared well for college.
yeah. And I suppose with Keefe Tech, which was such a
And of
good
course, they
technical
had a
school.
mother and a father at home with them, most of them too, which you don't have now.
All right, and that's interesting. So most of your friends and the people that lived in
Yeah.
Hopkinton were pretty much, they were two-parent families.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. You
And
think
that makes a difference.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, people were able to keep track of their children
Yeah,
a little
the
bit
two
more.
girls went to University of Mass, where they met their husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And Ricky went to Rhode Island School of Design. He was an artist.
Yeah.
And Diane, well, Sheila went on to took some more courses. She worked at the Framingham Union Hospital maternity for quite a while, and then she took some more classes and she learned how to. She's a teacher now. She
Mhm.
teaches maternity.
Yes.
So she's giving up her job as in maternity down at the hospital, and she has 6 students in the maternity course that she's teaching at the Framingham Union Hospital, and
Yeah.
it's only 1 day a week, a 12-hour day.
Wow.
So she's going to keep that. She's going to
Yeah.
keep doing that.
Yeah.
So it just runs for 1 day, 12 hours,
Mhm.
and it's for a month. And she's probably finished the first semester. Now she's going to get another group of 6 kids, graduates are studying to be in a maternity course.
Yeah.
And sometimes she has one fella with them, you know.
Yeah.
So she's starting for another month.
Good for her.
And it'll be 1 day, a 12-hour day
Yeah.
for a month. It's pretty, and
So-
she teaches at Framingham Union Hospital.
Okay. But none of your children live in Hopkinton. Some live in the area.
No,
but-
Sheila and Chuck live in Natick, and Diane and Mark live in Framingham,
Yeah.
over near the Sudbury line, and Ricky Lee lives in Hawaii, and Cheryl and Dan live in DeBary, Florida.
Okay.
Of
So the
course, we
two.
go and visit them too
Right,
occasionally.
that your 2 children that live around here,
Yes.
but not in Hopkinton, did they ever express a desire to want to live in Hopkinton, or are they more comfortable living in
Oh, they-
Framingham, Natick, where there's
Yeah,
more activity?
That's where they work, you know.
All right,
It's
so they're
close to
closer
their
to
jobs.
work, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure why in the 50s and 60s Framingham and Natick had a
And
lot
they
more
call
people
me,
than
I
Hopkinton.
tell them, I says, I don't need any gifts or anything, just keep calling me, call me, so they do.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else, focusing back sort of on Hopkinton again, anything else you can think of in your memories about Hopkinton and what it was like to come here as a young adult, raise your family here, what you
Well,
liked
it's-
about the town the most, or
A
anything
lot of
that's
good people
changed?
live here,
Mm-hmm.
and even the ones that have moved to Florida, they all come back, or else they come back and are buried here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to walk up and down the cemetery right next door here.
Yeah,
It's like, you know everybody, I know everybody that's there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Fred's right behind the trees.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
That's great,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, is there anything else that you want to mention
No, I
about
think that's
Hopkinton?
it, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Well, I
and
hope
I'm-
you can get something out
I
of it.
can, yeah.
Rose.
Let me just end, and then I'll shut off the camera by saying
I
that
did
this is.
belong to Women's Club for a while, and
Yes.
Garden Club.
Yes,
for
all
a
right.
while.
So those were great
But, I
activities.
mean, when you're working full-time,
Mhm.
you don't really have that much time. You come home and you go to sleep.
Right. So you were in the Hopkinton Women's Club and the Hopkinton Garden Club mostly when you were a homemaker.
Yeah.
And you had the time. Well, I know the
Yeah.
Women's Club does a lot of service activities. It's been a great,
Yeah.
great opportunity for women in Hopkinton. And the Garden Club does
Yeah.
service as well. They just, I forget how many thousands of bulbs they just planted, daffodil bulbs for the
Really?
on the marathon route. Yes, the Boston
Yeah.
Strong. Some
Uh-huh.
committee bought bulbs so that they'll all be in bloom next year for the marathon. So it
But
sounds
see,
beautiful.
most of those women, they have jobs, you know, and so they were having a problem trying to find a place to meet, because they used to meet at each other's homes, you
Yeah,
know. So
yeah.
I know they've met at the library quite often.
Is this
after
the
hours.
Garden Club or?
The garden club.
Yeah, and the Women's Club
I don't know too
meets
much.
at the church. Yeah, it always met at the
They do.
Congregational, but now
I
it's
gave that up when I went to work at GE.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't make it.
yeah,
Too
that's
tired.
certainly understandable. All right, well, let's close with this is the end of the October 31st, 2013 interview with Alfreda White. The interviewer was Nancy Clark.